Guys, my name is Ankush Gaurav and I welcome you to Gone To series. In the previous tutorial, I talked about creating a simple web application using Spring MVC provided annotations. I showed you how to write a controller class using controller and request mapping annotations. While writing the controller class, I very clearly explained you the purpose of putting a request mapping annotation on top of a method which is residing in a controller class. The idea is very simple and clear. If you want this method to be invoked by the front controller when a client enters a URL on the browser, then its request mapping pattern has to match with the incoming request URL pattern. So if the incoming request URL pattern is something like this, then the front controller would invoke this method for further processing the request only after finding that the request mapping pattern of this method is matching up with the URL pattern of this incoming URL request. The method which you write here in the controller class for the purpose of handling an incoming request is in general called as the request handler method by Spring MVC framework. So what happens if I put one more request handler method in the same controller class with the name hi world and with the request mapping pattern like this? Nothing special. It's just a concept in Spring MVC framework that you can write as many request handler methods in a one controller class as you like. So in this case, if a client is going to type this URL on the browser, then the front controller would make a call to this method for further processing the request. And if the client types this URL, then the front controller would make a call to this method for further processing the request. It simply means it would just match up this request mapping pattern which you mention on top of a method with the incoming request URL pattern and makes a call to the corresponding method. Any controller class having more than one request handler method in it is called as a multi-action controller class. So what's a multi-action controller class? It's simply a controller class having more than one request handler methods in it and nothing more. Before I proceed further and tell you further concepts, let me tell you one very important point here. What if a client types this URL on the browser? If you notice here, its URL pattern is not matching up with the request mapping patterns which are available in this controller class on each method. In this case, the application will return a response back to the client browser saying there is no resource available on the server which can process this request. Let me run it and show you how this works. Type this URL, enter. So I typed a URL for which there is no matching request mapping annotation pattern is present in the controller class in the application, and the application simply returned the requested resource is not available for error. Good. Let's proceed further. Guys, there is a provision in Spring MVC framework that you can put the request mapping annotation on top of a class too. So if I put the request mapping annotation with this pattern at the class level, also what it means, there is something known as a relative and an absolute path in the programming world. Earlier, you used to type this URL and the front controller used to make a call to this method, and for this URL, the front controller used to make a call to this method. But now, if you type these URLs again on the browser, the front controller would not be able to process your request and it will send you back the resource is not available to process these requests. And the reason is this annotation's presence at the class level. Now, the request mapping annotations which you are mentioning here on the top of methods are relative to this annotations pattern. What it means is, now if you want to make a call to this method for a URL request, then the URL request should look like this. And if you want to make a call to this method, then the request should look like this. Means this pattern has to be there in the URL before the individual method's URL pattern. Let me run this example on the server and show you how this thing works. Here the application is already running on the server and has taken all these changes dynamically which I just made. So let me straightforward go to the browser and test this application. Paste this URL. If you observe here, this is the earlier URL which I used to type before putting this annotation on top of the hello controller class. So ideally now it should return me resources not available. Yes, it has sent me the response as per my expectation. Now I'll change this URL to have greet pattern present before welcome. Cool, this time application has happily sent me the response using this method. And same is applied to this method. If I want to make a call to this method, then I have to use this pattern before this pattern in the incoming request URL. In the subsequent tutorials, we will learn more about request mapping annotation while talking on different concepts in Spring MVC framework. Guys, thank you for liking my tutorials. Your any sort of interaction makes me upload more and more tutorials, so please keep them up by commenting or providing feedback. If you have any queries or questions, please send me on this ID. Please like the video if you really liked it, and do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel Contour series, and I'm gonna catch you in my next tutorial.